Hello, welcome back to Learn It from a Layman. I'm Carl. I'm back with Matt, and despite what you may think, we actually like to have Tim on the podcast. So Tim's back with us.
It'll be our little secret.
Yeah, well, um, and then we're welcoming back for the second time Connor Harper, who we could refer to as Dr. Harper, but we will not.
All right, I'll see you guys later.
It was more fitting on the last podcast to refer to him as Dr. Harper, given that he was imparting specialized knowledge. And this podcast, we're going to be discussing the basics of international travel. Connor has some experience.
As opposed to mass spectrometry, which our listeners should definitely check out.
That's right.
Yes. If you want to know why Connor is Dr. Harper, then you can go listen to that. But for the laymen out there that have come to listen to international travel advice and insights and anecdotes, that's what we'll be discussing today. And I believe all of us have traveled internationally. I don't know how many of us have traveled internationally since the pandemic. So I have once, but maybe there are some additional insights we can give about that as well. But we're going to go ahead and get started here by talking about international travel preparation. So I'm going to start with a story that this was not my first international trip, but this is my first international trip where I think I was in charge of my own itinerary, and I was going to Iceland. And something that they don't teach you. So this is the first thing off the top, that if you're preparing for an international trip to be aware of, is your passport expiration date is only hypothetical. It's not real. Your passport does not really expire when it says it expires. It expires some arbitrary number of months before that, because most countries do not let you in within like 3 to 6 months before your passport expires.
Now, is that kind of like a practical thing? Like they don't want to let you in and then have your passport expire while you're in the country?
Exactly. Yep.
Oh.
Yep. And so that was something I had not been aware of, and so I was something like 5 days pre-trip. I thought I was all set, and for whatever reason, I felt like I needed to double check to make sure I didn't need a visa. And we'll talk about visas a little bit more in a second. But I had already checked Iceland as far as their rules with Americans coming and visiting, but I was like, you know what, I'm going to double check. Got on, was reading, and some note, just a little note on some travel site said, make sure your expiration date is more than, I don't remember what it is now for Iceland, but 4 months out. And I picked up my passport and expired in 3 months, and I thought, well, shoot. Because this is my plane's booked. I'm supposed to be in Iceland in like 5 days, and this is for a academic conference. And so luckily I lived in San Diego, and I could scramble, and I could make this happen, and I did. So getting a passport is not particularly challenging, but except the time frame involved can be a bit longer than what you would hope. And so if you have to go to the post office, get things signed and all those other things, and then ship it off to the government and wait for it to come back, you're probably, it depends on the time of year and I think the backlog that they currently have, but very frequently you need to plan on up like 6 weeks or 2 months.
Well, and your mileage may vary depending on what country you find yourself in. We're obviously talking from an American perspective.
Yes, I am speaking from an American perspective. It is, yes, that's a good insight. We do have listeners all over the world, so potentially your government is more or less effective at issuing passports. In the United States, it's weeks and weeks, months out usually for a normal passport.
About what was I think it was 8 weeks we were told to expect normal processing.
Okay. Wow. So, and you can pay for expedited. But even expedited, if you have to ship it, you're probably talking 2 weeks, 10 days. I'm not entirely sure. It's been a while. But in my case, because I could go into the passport office, so that's if you're in a situation where you need a passport ASAP, like in 2 days. And you happen to live close to a passport office. And there are a couple in California. I think there's a number just in the big cities, as you can imagine. You can go in there and get it done real quick. So I got mine done in 2 days. You need to get your photo. You need to obviously do your online your applications, fill those out, and then you can take those in and get paid and pay for kind of a rush fee. But in my case, it was much cheaper than not going to Iceland. So.
So would this be travel tip number 1 is live in San Diego, San Francisco, or New York?
Exactly. Yes. So
I think travel tip number 1 is, in general, plan ahead around getting your documentation in order.
Right.
And as you mentioned, the passport is not the only document.
Correct. And so we'll talk about visas now. But yeah, as far as your passport goes, make sure that if you've had a passport for a while, you're aware of when it expires and how soon before it expires you're actually allowed, how soon before it expires you actually have to renew it. So, okay, visas. Now, I think, Tim, you went to China once or twice. You need a visa to go to China, right?
Yes. Also a MasterCard if you got one. I'm just kidding. But yes, you need a visa.
Okay. Tell us what that process was for you.
Oh boy, it's been a while. So you have to get your passport and all that. And then you have to, I think it mostly involves like, you have to fill out paperwork and give people money. By which I mean, you have to like, it's just some application and you fill it out and you pay like, I think it was like $500 or something. It was a lot of money, like 300 maybe or 400. It's been like more than a decade, I think, since I've done it. So trying to remember, but it was mostly just money and more paperwork and hoo-ha, right. And kind of like right. You guys are talking about that go back and forth waiting process. So.
Yeah. So for the layman,
want to talk about what a visa is?
Yeah, I was going to give the definition, but for the layman, I mean, it really is what Tim said. It's just more paperwork.
And money.
For the specific need of a visa, so it's a main difference between a visa and a passport. A visa is an endorsement placed within a passport that grants the holder official permission to enter, leave, or stay in the country for a specified time period. And so there are different types of visas. So you can have a tourist visa, a student visa, a work and transit visa. And so it's just things that worked out between different governments that allow a particular status of people to go into that country. And obviously there are fees involved. And so your country, whatever country you live in, has that arrangement, and they have a fee associated with issuing that endorsement to you. And so that is what you have to get, and then you put that inside your passport. Your passport is just your generic travel document to go, hypothetically, to any country. Once again, depending on what the arrangement of your government is with the country that you're wanting to visit. And so if some countries have pretty open arrangements as far as if you just have a passport, you're good to go as a tourist, at least, right? If you just want to up and travel from the United States to England, you just need your passport inside a certain time frame. Now, if you're going to stay there for 6 months, then that's when you're talking more like a work visa or some other document that gives you the right to stay there longer. And so, Matt, did you have additional insights?
Yeah, it's kind of a way to think about passports and visas. Passports are things issued by your government saying that this person is one of our citizens and we think they should be able to travel internationally. A visa is issued by the government that you are visiting saying, yeah, we'll let you in under these circumstances, be it student, worker, general tourist, whatever. So right. Sometimes governments work things out where they say, you know what, our people can travel between our countries and they don't need visas or special documents. Sometimes they do. It all depends. So that would be kind of step number 2 of your preparation after you've made sure that your passport is good to go so that your government will claim you as a citizen while you travel abroad. make sure that any appropriate visa arrangements are in order if you need them, so that the visiting government will actually let you in.
Yeah, these are things like I said, you want to have all of your ducks in order here, because having issues with your documents can get you sent home. So
or stranded in airline terminals.
Right.
Okay. And now you can speak from experience. Even if you have all your ducks in a row, there are some countries where they don't allow for animals to come in with you. So just
okay,
be
Tim. Okay.
That was a.
So it was an attempt,
Hey, I'm just trying to make this accessible to our really certain
duck
laymen.
owning listeners. I mean,
That's right.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Okay, so depending on the length of stay and the country that you're visiting, those are the things you need to look up, and these things are accessible. I'm sure the United States government has a site where you can look up any of your government site, whatever country you live in, probably has a government website where you can look up the documents that you need in order to travel or stay or work in a different country. So that's worth looking into well in advance. Don't buy your tickets first.
All right. So what's next?
All right. So now that's the boring part and the paperworky part and all that kind of stuff. The funner part of international travel is what you think of when you think of international travel, which is
traveling.
The traveling, exactly. So let's start with the mode of transportation. So most people don't boat from one country to another, at least not in the United States. Most countries that I'm familiar with, you're probably traveling either by train, car, or by and large would be by airplane. So now first let's talk train travel. That's mostly my limited experience with train travel internationally is we rode the Channel when I was a teenager, and that's between Paris, France to London, England. And so that's an international train, and so you do need documentation there and stuff like that. But the train, obviously, train travel inside of Europe is pretty prevalent, and so that's something that you can look into and figure out. And that's, once again, all the considerations that come with other travel, as far as are there what the pros and cons of are you saving money? Is it going to take longer? What are the conditions inside this mode of transportation? Are you going to be cramped? But also, the a number of people that are going with you. So lots of considerations as to mode of transportation, but the car is going to be the cheapest if you can do so in a relatively small amount of time. I'm not driving from here to Chile, for example, even though I maybe technically could. So
it would certainly be an adventure. But I'm thinking extended, learn it from a layman travel blog, here to Chile. Be like a project.
One thing, yes. No. How about no? One thing, so once again, an anecdote here. So hopefully this helps you give some insight into traveling in a car from one country to another. My family and I went to Mexico last year, and we live in San Diego, so we're not. I mean, it's not exactly a huge trip to go across the border to Mexico, and we went down to it's called Rocky Point, Puerto Penasco, and traveling there was no big deal. And on the way into Mexico, there was no line. Everything was nice and easy, and no problems. On the way back, there's a few things to consider, at least in the United States. The ability to get accurate directions on something like a Google Maps or a Waze app is kind of, these days, you just expect that it's going to work and it's going to work correctly. Coming back was far more of an adventure. The road quality was very low. We had to drive. I've never had worse driving conditions in my life. Some of the road was covered with sand dunes. There were potholes big enough that I could have broken an axle of the vehicle we were driving in this pot. I mean, it's not one of the potholes you hit and keep driving. It's you hit it and you're done. Your car is done. You've probably injured yourself. It's like getting in a car accident. So that was, and those were landmines all over the road for probably about an hour. And then when you got close to the border, there was massive lines and a lack of good directions. And so we both, eventually we ended up coming in the wrong lane, getting detained at the border, and sitting in the drug search center for like an hour while they figured out that actually this car full of 5 children packed full of stuff that you use at the beach is not just a front for drugs. We just, as we explained to them before, were actually just gotten the wrong lane because of bad directions, which parenthetically, border people all knew about. They all knew that you got the wrong directions coming back through that port of entry into the United States, but nobody had done anything about it, and so they just had probably 50 cars, I think they said, a day that came in the wrong entry.
So the moral of this story is,
don't trust Google Maps.
actual moral of the story is,
don't drive.
yeah.
The moral of the story. The moral of the story was I've contacted Google a couple times about that route and said you can't route people this way.
Well, it's in general, you want to carefully plan your transportation, whatever it is, be it by car, plane, train, whatever. Another good thing that helps is if you can talk to someone who's gone through that same route before.
Yes, that is very insightful because my brother-in-law then went a couple months after we did, and I explained to him exactly how to do it. So, yes, if you can get in contact with someone that's traveled to the country that you're traveling and the mode that they've traveled, they can probably give you some insight.
And there are websites and dedicated to travel. People who just get together and rave about how they like traveling and things to watch out there. Turns out the internet is full of specialty groups for all kinds of stuff. So you can find a lot of insights through those if you don't know anyone personally who's been wherever it is that you're going.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So obviously, if you're considering international travel, I'm sure you've done some of this research, but yeah, hopefully some of these anecdotes and some of these things will maybe key something off in your and help you do some research that will avoid circumstances like the one that I encountered there in Mexico. So if you're driving, there is a lot to consider because driving across a country, a border of a country, all of a sudden you've got different traffic laws, you've got different licensing laws. So there's a lot to consider, and different insurance laws, which is once again something you have to consider if you're driving across the border, because turns out your car insurance probably ends at the border. So make sure that you're aware of all of those considerations. Okay. Now flying. Now this is something everyone's had experience with on this podcast. But I'm going to give one anecdote here quickly, and then anyone else, Tim, Connor, or Matt, if you have anything that you want to give insights in either into airports or the actual plane flight or how to arrange them, go ahead. But so I've already said I flew to Iceland here. This was a number of years ago. But something that I became aware of when I was flying to Iceland is Iceland Air was at the time actually pretty affordable. Now I haven't done pricing as far as flying via Iceland Air recently, but it was a pretty affordable airline. And what they offer is if you fly to Europe, let's say you're flying from the United States to Europe, any of the destinations that Iceland Air flies to, which is pretty much any of the destinations that you'd normally expect, any of the big capitals in Europe, you can add a layover in Iceland for free, just whatever the price it would actually be to fly to that your final destination, you can lay over in Iceland for up to 7 days without any additional cost. So if you want to see Iceland, they're essentially letting you do it at no additional cost, which is pretty cool, given that it kind of the way that flights going from the United States to Europe, generally the flight path on the globe generally takes you up that way anyway. It's not a lot longer as far as actual time in the air, and then you can spend a couple of days going and seeing all of the awesome things that you have heard about in Iceland. Or seen in the Secret Life of Walter Mitty. That was the movie. Anyway,
so with that plug for visiting Iceland.
Exactly. Just the consideration is look into those types of things. If you have another stop that you want to make on the way or to your destination, or just look for those types of perks that some countries might offer, or airlines. Matt, did you have other airline tips, or Tim?
Real quick, we to let our listeners
Tim.
know this podcast has not been sponsored by the Iceland
Tourist Association.
They're good people, though. Good people.
Not at all. Certainly not.
No, just thoughts on international air travel, just air travel in general. Be courteous. Try not to make waves. Don't just follow instructions and don't be needy. Do the preparation you need to beforehand. If you need to ask for help, be polite, be courteous about asking for help, and people will generally help you. But yeah, keep in mind that when you're traveling, this goes for any mode of travel, at some level, you do represent the country that you're coming from. So in general, we want to make favorable impressions. And that goes for you from wherever you're from to wherever you're going.
Yes. I have another story about that, but I'll let Tim go ahead.
Well, I was just going to plug in a little bit of experiential knowledge of mine. The jet lag is something that, if depending on how far you travel, you might encounter. But it, as the name suggests, it happens when you travel by air, because you're throwing your body clock out of whack with the time zone that you're into. Your body doesn't just immediately adjust. It's in my experience, it's more pronounced traveling from east to west than from west to east. So when I would, for example, fly from the United States to China, I would find myself, when I got to China, just kind of go through the rest of that day, and then come 7 o'clock in the evening, you just be really tired, and like really tired, and you just would need to go to sleep or whatever. And then after a day or two, that kind of wears off, and you're adjusted to the time. Flying east to west, though, returning from China, it was the strangest sensation, because your body doesn't adjust, and so you find yourself waking up fully awake and alert at 4 a.m, and which is not something that I've ever been used to. But so you might just be prepared for that and keep that in mind. If you're traveling a long distance, you're arriving at your destination in the evening, you're probably not going to want to plan on a late night of partying and shopping or sightseeing or anything like that. You're going to need some crash time. So work that into your plans. It's not safe or healthy to try to push your body too far.
Though, if you're flying on a tight time frame, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. The time I flew to Iceland, I went directly from the airport to a 5-hour bus tour, which was brutal, but necessary. Matt?
Yeah, well, I think Tim kind of had it. If you can plan against or plan to not have that happen, that is favorable. So
quite.
But it all depends on what your schedules are able to support.
Yeah. Also.
Oh, sorry. I'll just put in a quick note with that. I mean, obviously, sometimes your you're limited. But this isn't a trick, but if you know someone in the place you're traveling to, that's super cool. So if you happen to know someone like when I went to China, I went because my parents were living there, and it's a totally different experience to go there, be able to stay at a home. You've got people who know their way around, and it's much, in my mind, a much better experience than you go there and you're in a city, an unfamiliar city. You don't know anyone. You have to find your own hotel. You have to find your own way around, or pay a travel company to do it for you. So if you know lots of people, and then who live abroad, then take advantage while they're living there, and go visit them.
Which is
People
not
like
to
them.
say that don't travel if you don't know anybody, but it's just, that's part of your planning.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So can I say something about travel and planning and what the lack of planning can get for you?
Sure.
So, for honeymoon, my wife and I traveled to Japan because she's originally from Japan. Was born there and wanted to visit her grandmother and then do some sightseeing. And we made perhaps a somewhat immature decision to decide, like, oh yeah, mother-in-law has a connection with somebody at Delta Airlines. They can get you on these things called buddy passes, which is kind of like a standby travel. And let me tell you, if there's ever a time to not do international standby travel, it's when you're also going international. So, fun story was, on the way out, we ended up spending one day kind of just waiting in the airport for there to be open tickets, right from that time Salt Lake City to Seattle, and then Seattle to Tokyo. We waited an extra day, but we got to Seattle, and they're like, yeah, we'll get you on the flight tomorrow. And we're like, okay, look, one night over in Seattle after a day in the airport, like, that's kind of worth the savings, right? Because it's much less expensive to travel this way. And we've come to find that the seats that were open on the flight over to Japan, which is a nice 15-hour flight, were business class, no less. So got to fly in style. Unfortunately, the food in business class is a little posh and was apparently undercooked because it made my wife terribly ill. And so she got very sick on the flight over. We had to rush to her grandmother's house and cancel a bunch of plans. And anyways, it was quite an improvisation at that point. But the worst part of all, considering travel, is that, again, standby tickets aren't guaranteed, and you better have a backup plan if it doesn't work out. So on the way home, it was a busy travel season in Japan. It's a Obon, or the time where they go to visit ancestors' graves. It's late in the summer, which is when also we were visiting, and we were unable to get a standby flight for 2 or 3 days, and ultimately I just had to pony up and buy real flights day of, which was
that's expensive.
very expensive, and ultimately essentially deleted all the savings we had made from going on standby.
Oh boy.
Good thing said, I don't regret the trip. It was very memorable. Got to meet my wife's grandmother and speak Japanese with her, and get approved to be part of the family.
Awesome.
But
sure.
Looking back, I would have definitely taken things a little more into my own hands.
Right.
And just guaranteeing that things would work out, right?
Yeah.
Standby is not the way to go. In the United States, I don't know, maybe consider, but going internationally, it's just that much more stressful and difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and addendum to that. So a friend of mine, and the audience knows him as well, Johnny, who's been on the podcast a number of times. His wife is the daughter of a Delta pilot, and so right after they got married, and a number of times thereafter, they also did the standby type thing to travel, because she flew for free that way, and then they got some massive discount otherwise. But it was a nightmare in a lot of cases, and especially when they had children. Yes, that's a good insight. Thanks, Connor.
Yeah, mentioned too on the way home. We almost got a ticket, but they only had one ticket available.
Mm.
So they asked if I wanted to go without my wife. Like, that's all right, thank you. I'll stay here with my wife I had just married.
Right, a wonderful way to end the
Thanks,
honeymoon.
Trevor.
See you later, honey.
Guess I'm good.
Good times.
So that could take us to point number 4. And I'm kind of assuming what a point number 4 is here, but financial planning.
Yes, quite. Yeah, and there's a
So
lot to consider.
do that.
Yes.
Different things to think about. I mean, offhand, where are you going to stay and how much is it going to cost? Where are you going to eat? How much is that going to cost? What is the travel expenses going to look like and all of the taxes associated with it? What are you doing for local transportation? How often are you going to be traveling from one point to another when you're at your destination? And are you going to use taxis, public transport, camel caravan? I mean, it's all these things for all these costs. And then what are your contingencies? And this is a key part to it. If your flight gets canceled, what's your backup plan? What are you going to do to get back home if the standby flight doesn't come through because you didn't take Connor's advice? Or, what do you do if your wallet is lost? Do you know where to go? Do you know who to get help from in country? Yep.
And I'll add to that, Matt's comment on finances. You always assume it's going to cost more than you plan on it costing. I don't think I've ever been on a trip where I'm like, wow, that was cheaper than we expected. Just like it's going to cost more. So you want to plan plenty of buffer room.
Right.
Also, plan on canceling your credit card because while we're on that topic, or actually you can notify your bank or your credit card ahead of time, because I've had that happen where we travel. You use your credit card once, it goes through, but then after that it's rejected because it looks to the financial institution like your card's been stolen because you got all of your transactions in one area, then all of a sudden it's in a totally different place. And so as a matter of precaution, they'll cancel it. So you need to let your financial institution know ahead of time, hey, we're traveling.
And it's pretty easy to do. It's just a phone call. I'm going to be traveling at these locations, probably starting on this date. Give them a range in case your travel plans change. If you need to stay an extra few days, you don't want to have your card shut off on you.
Yeah, and sometimes, and I think at least in major credit cards nowadays, you can even do it just on the website. You just log into your portal and put in your travel dates, and so you can update that as well if you have internet access, whatever country you're visiting. But
which takes me to I don't know if you want to spend too much more time on that one, but another point I wanted to talk about was security. So we'll come back to that when we talk about that.
We'll talk about security in a second. Another, just as far as finances go, once again, just be fully aware and open-eyed about your options and what flexibility you have in the trip and what flexibility you do not have in the trip, right? So with the anecdote that Connor shared, as far as like, okay, well, it's just he and his wife, they're traveling without a particular timeline, but after 3 days of waiting for a standby flight coming back, okay, well, we're out of options now. So if you're looking,
what case, I had to return to get back into school. So it was
exactly. Right. At some point, you run out of your contingencies, But but if you're looking to alternative ways to save money, there are some. And once again, it's just a question of risk tolerance and backup plans. So recently, my wife and I went to Hawaii, and we were going to get a car, rent a car there, and so we looked into the traditional car rental agencies and what the prices were, and then one that I wasn't familiar with but is pretty well established is Turo, and that's kind of your Airbnb for cars, and so that was the first time I had really interacted with it. I think I'd seen it before but hadn't done it, and so I got on and obviously, in that scenario, you don't have a company backing it as much. These are individually owned cars that are offering them up. Once again, kind of in the Airbnb style. You can go and pick a car and you pay them, and the website and the Turo company does, its best to oversee this. But so I looked into that, and it was going to save us. It was a 50% savings over a traditional car rental place. And so I thought, well, this is ideal. And because it's just me and my wife, and we have family members that live in Hawaii, if this doesn't work out, we'll have, there are backups here that we can make work. And it ended up working out just fine. The car was great and exactly what we needed for the time frame. So if you're looking into non-traditional ways to if you're staying in an Airbnb somewhere, maybe that's cheaper than a hotel, but is it in a safe location? Is that a big consideration? If it's you traveling with a bunch of children, it probably is a consideration. So if you're trying to save money and considering finances and consider what the risks are and what are they worth the reward that you're getting for financially. Okay, Matt. Security.
Okay. So with all of that, yeah, security is is just a major factor that you want to plan for, and that frequently gets neglected, where we think things will be just fine, just like at home. Well, when you travel, things aren't like at home. And it's just something to be aware of. Know the situation in the place that you're going to. Know the types of crimes that do and don't happen. Know who you would go to for help if something were to happen to you. There's just a bunch of things like that you want to be aware of. And when you're talking about, these types of deals, make sure that you've done some research from some credible sources on whether or not the Airbnb style accommodations, the Turos, their local variants of those are reputable and safe to use.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's kind of what I would say in the planning stage. Most countries have a state department of some kind, and most of those state departments will kind of tell you what the conditions are in all the different countries that you may want to visit, in terms of how hostile or friendly is your reception going to be? What types of things should you need to work out or watch out for specifically? So make use of those kind of government resources that are offered to you. Now, once you get over there, do be security conscious. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of your valuables and how conspicuous or inconspicuous you're carrying them. One of the big things that you can do is don't try to stand out. If you are in another country, maybe don't wear the T-shirt that has your native flag on it. It's something that can, in some parts of the world, just say, I'm foreign, easy to exploit, and therefore a target.
Right.
Be aware of that sort of thing. In general, it's a good idea to travel in a group. Again, this is going to depend a little bit on the situation in the country that you're going to. Some places are more or less safe than others for different people or groups or whatever. Be aware of that.
And Matt,
then
going
finally,
on that,
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
Sure.
I was just
I
going
was
to add
just
one more point, and then I'll let you add yours.
yeah, go.
Be aware of financial security in the place that you want to go as well. If you're going to be using your credit card to pay for everything, well, maybe make sure that the credit cards are actually secure in the place that you're going. Make sure that people actually accept credit cards over there. Different places are vulnerable to different types of exploits, and just be aware of that. Be aware of how to protect yourself, your finances, and your identity. Be aware of what people can and cannot ask you for. And have a backup plan when it comes to your finances. If your credit cards are stolen or compromised, Do you know where the embassy is so that you can get some kind of help? Just those types of things. And I'll turn it over to Tim from there.
And just kind of along those lines, just when you travel, plan on being a mark. You're just the fact that you're walking out of the international terminal of the airport and may or may not look like a local. There are people who specialize in targeting and exploiting tourists and travelers, and they'll take advantage of every aspect of your ignorance about the place you're in. They'll and like Matt said, don't try to stand out. You want to, even if you have no idea where you're going, walk with confidence. Don't kind of stand looking around and kind of ambling. You walk with confidence to where you're going. On this, because the people will actually kind of, you can actually watch this if you go to a kind of a junction point. But there these hucksters in a lot of places that will, and they're very good. They'll come up to you and they'll strike up a conversation and they'll start asking you questions. And if you just approach it like a normal conversation, then pretty soon they're going to be steering you towards whatever their scheme is. So you kind of have to learn. And for me, one of my weaknesses in a case like this is I try to be friendly, which is, I guess, not really a weakness, but just as a traveler, you have to learn sometimes to be firm, and a firm no will get you out of a lot of trouble. And I've been approached in multiple countries by these people who say, "Oh yeah, we're waiting for you. You're the and they'll just straight up lie to you and say, "Oh yeah, we're the shuttle company that you're waiting on or that you're looking for," and they're not, and you have to be really careful. This is true also when you're going to any tourist destination, a shop, a market, any place where any kind of negotiating is going on. If you are a traveler, then the fact that you're traveling internationally means that you probably have money, or at least enough money to travel, and therefore you're a mark. There's people going to try to make money off of you. I remember once in China, there was this market, that kind of an outdoor market, selling all sorts of art, ware, and crafts and all sorts of stuff. It was a really cool place, a lot of fun. And I remember once trying to haggle with this just old guy, and they had these cute little toys that I was going to take to my little sisters, and just these cheap little things. And he was haggling me up, and I was haggling him down. And the lady in the stall next to him was just laughing because this guy was just taking me for a ride. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I did not. So just be aware of that. A lot of times tourists just kind of stumble into it and think, oh, I guess that's a good price, and you're working in a foreign currency and you don't know how much you're really paying, and the other person is awfully confident and just so again, my tip is be prepared to say no firmly, walk away, and when they grab you, when they call you back, you're firm, and don't let them take advantage of you.
Let them know that Liam Neeson is your father and he has a special set of skills.
That's right.
Yes. Okay. So there's a bunch. Yeah, we could spend even more time on security, and anecdotally, I've seen all of these things in some of my trips, but I wanted to hit a couple more before we wrapped up here. One is language. So in the day of expecting people to speak English, at least from the United States perspective, often when we go international, language is the last thing we consider. It's a little bit presumptuous and a bit rude to just assume that everyone should have to speak your language. And if English is your language, then you obviously, if you're going to Europe, there's a high probability that people there speak English. Obviously, depending on the particular destination in Europe, if you go to the Netherlands, they probably speak better English than you do. So when my trip to Iceland, I I felt really bad. Generally, I try to learn at least a few phrases and something that I can try to interact with when I go to a new country. I didn't have the time. I went to Iceland, and so when my first interaction with a local, I was going up to buy something, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, English?" And she replied, "Yes, of course I speak English." Right. So once again, depending on your destinations, good chance that they'll speak English, assuming you know English as well, and you're listening to this podcast. So I assume that you do. But it is nice, and I think worthwhile to learn at least some phrases, some basic, hopefully useful phrases that will help you get, for example, ¿Dónde está el baño?
Where's
Just
my banjo?
Yes.
exactly. I went to China actually with Tim once, and I don't know whose genius idea it was to set us up with a tour guide that only spoke Chinese, but it was somebody's genius idea, and this was relying then on me. This was me and my wife, my parents, and Tim going on with this Chinese-speaking tour guide, and I was the only one that had any Chinese. I think training at that point. Tim can offend you very quickly, but
Chinese was excellent.
And so luckily I had taken a couple semesters worth of Chinese, so I could get us around mostly. But if you're going to a foreign country, be at least aware and courteous enough to say, I at least learn to say I don't speak Spanish in Spanish. Okay. So I think a little bit of time with spending an hour or two on the language is worthwhile if you're going international. We expect Google Translate or something like that to save the day, but reality is, I think the personal touch and the humanity shows that you've tried at least to learn a few phrases or words or whatever. It is generally appreciated, even if they then speak to you in English, probably without an accent, if you're going to anywhere in the Scandinavian region. Okay. And then the last thing, Matt, I kind of already touched on it, but just cash versus credit. In most of the United States, and I think obviously all across the world these days, we expect credit cards to be accepted, and in most places they are. But do be aware of the idea that maybe you need cash, and so then you have to look at the exchange rate, and what's the best way to get your money changed. If you need to go to an ATM there, what are the fees associated with that? So there's, and I've actually heard the flip recently. My aunt, who that just moved away from Hawaii, was telling me that I guess in certain areas in China there are completely cashless. You can't actually use cash anywhere, and that would be a whole different set of issues if you hadn't prepared for that. So be aware of the customs, the financial situation you're going to be in, as far as whether or not they're going to be requiring cash or credit cards, debit cards, whatever it might be. I think that will be pretty much all of the international advice that I have. So, any final anecdotes, Connor?
I have one. So the last thing you have to do after international travel is, get back to your country. And as I mentioned, I already had trouble with that once. That wasn't the only trouble, just getting an airplane. The other thing is in a previous trip to Japan, I had made the mistake of, trying to bring home a few snacks, and mistakenly brought some curry mix that contained, like beef powder or beef like extract.
Ooh.
And, so somebody at the LA airport at that time saw that and was like, "Oh, sorry, that's not okay." And just put it in the trash. And I thought, okay, that's that. It's unfortunate, but that's, how it goes, right? I wasn't particularly broken up about it. It was something that cost a few bucks. But unfortunately, it would seem that put me on some kind of list. So the next time I came,
Kirby lid.
returning from Japan with my wife after this stressful experience and not being able to get a flight back, I found myself at the immigration tonight and was told after stepping up and showing my passport, took my passport and said, just go step over there, not through the line, just over there, meaning not past the barrier, and just told me to wait there without little or no explanation. And
That was a good
so I
sign.
sat there nervously, and it was like 10 minutes. My wife had gone through without any issue and was waiting, and she's like, ma'am, you can't wait there. I made her move along, so I was kind of like, oh no, like we're trying to catch another flight. What are we gonna do?
While Connor's replaying all the Jason Bourne movies in his head.
More like I was, I tried to address the, what I thought was the nice man at the customs desk, who I immediately learned was not a very nice man. He used to shout at me in no uncertain terms, "Sir, get over there. Stay where I told you." Even though I'd only taken about one step from where I was at. Anyways, I waited for another 10 minutes, and finally, after being there for 20 minutes, no idea what was going on, somebody came, retrieved me. It's like, sorry, we're gonna just need to take you through another line, and gonna have to just go through a special screening, which mostly just consists of him like, can I open your bag? And I was like, sure. Like, there's nothing of
Looking for that beef broth or whatever.
and he searched me. I went through my own metal detector just with my own security guards, and then ultimately ended up getting through all the lines at about the same time as my wife and meeting her on the other side. Yeah.
Moral
Make
of the
sure
story
that
is
you know-
don't get on the list.
Don't get on the list, and think carefully about what you're putting in your suitcase.
Yeah.
That is kind of a point that we didn't talk about. Know the restrictions on agricultural imports and exports. That snack that you have may not be allowed.
Yeah, and it may not even be things that you think are particularly threatening, or it's not like I was taking some exotic fruit or anything, right? It was curry by the exact same brand in the United States, but you cannot transport it into the United States. As it turns out, or at least at that moment in time. So I'd say that's my little anecdote about international travel is, being mindful of your packing and what immigration is, because often those can be some pretty serious people, and you do not want to run afoul of immigration, because it's nice to be able to return home.
Agreed. All right. Thanks, Connor. Tim, any
Last tip, just kind of a more philosophical one. Don't get caught up in the tourist stuff wherever you go. I know that you're going there to see the sights and that kind of thing, but remember that the best thing about any place you go is the people. Get to try to interact with the people, get to know the people. That's when travel is really fun, when you get to meet and actually make a friend from a whole different place of the world with a whole different culture and perspective. That's worth a whole lot of stops at the world's most largest ball of yarn or whatever.
Yes, I'm sure people are traveling internationally to check out the ball of yarn.
You never know.
You don't even know.
All right. Okay. Well,
sponsorship from the world's largest ball of yarn. Thanks.
Yes. Well, we didn't need their money or their yarn. Okay. Well, I think that will take us to the end of this podcast. So hopefully, if you didn't have some of these things in your mind before, you can look into it, do the requisite research before going international, and hopefully we've helped you avoid some potentially uncomfortable or inconvenient experiences. So this is we do want to encourage you to travel internationally, though, also because it does open your mind, like Tim said, the whole world of people out there, people living different cultures and customs. And so, when you travel internationally, be aware of those, try to learn them, try to, like Matt said, don't stick out, not only for your security, but also just to try to, experience what other people see and experience in other countries. So, but all of these things said, go have a good trip if you're traveling internationally soon, and join us back for the next podcast.
And now we'll each sign out in a different language.
Tot ziens.
Adios.
Laura vedere.
I guess I should go with sayonara, because that's the long goodbye.
Awesome. All right, thanks.